No, I'm ready. Are you guys ready? Welcome back. If you're just tuning in or if you've just arrived, my name is Jill Family. I'm a professor of law here at Widener Law Commonwealth, and I'm also the director of our Law and Government Institute. And so welcome to part 2 of our program about the state of Pennsylvania's government. And for this part of our program, we are honored to be joined by 4 legislators. There is a little bit of legislative business still going on, so we may be joined at some point by some additional legislators, but we are thrilled to have with us, I'll just start from my left, Senator Daylin Leach, who represents the 17th District, Representative Bryan Cutler, who represents the 100th Legislative District, and is an alumnus of Widener University School of Law from the Delaware campus. And then we have Senator Rob Teplitz, who represents the 15th District, and we have Representative Patty Kim, who represents the 103rd Legislative District. So I want to welcome, thank you. I want to welcome them all for joining us. And so we're going to have a moderated discussion for this part of our program. I'm going to pose some questions to our legislators. We will have time at the end for audience questions as well. So I'm going to start with sort of a general opening question for each of our legislators and give them a chance, a few minutes to respond. And just ask you generally, what do you think is the biggest challenge that's facing Pennsylvania's government today? And I'll start with Senator Leach.
Oh, great. I have a choice to say anything now. I think, broadly speaking, the biggest problem we have in Pennsylvania government is that virtually nothing ever gets done. And there are so many problems out there. There is a student loan crisis. There is a whole bunch of income inequality issues. There are infrastructure issues. There are, you can go down the line of problems that need solving. There are many of them. And there are many good solutions out there from both sides of the aisle. People introduce great legislation. Last time I looked, about 3,600 bills a year get introduced and about 200 ever get any sort of action. So the vast majority never get any traction at all, and many of them shouldn't. But there's a lot of very important things that we need to do and a lot of very good ideas on how to do them, and yet we never do. And why is that? And I think it's because our political system is broken. There's a lot of talk about reform in government. Most of the reforms you read about, I'm against. I'm against all of them. I think they're terrible ideas. Term limits, shrinking the legislature, you don't get paid if the budget's not done. If we get into that, they're apocalyptically bad ideas. However, there are a couple of things that are good ideas that if we don't do those, none of the other problems that I talked about will be addressed. Specifically, there are 2. In the federal government, there's 3, but we don't have the filibuster. We don't have as many procedural hurdles as the federal government does to getting things done. But let's talk about the 2 that are a big problem: campaign finance and gerrymandering. The biggest problem we have is gerrymandering. Gerrymandering, as you know, every 10 years we have to redraw the lines of districts to reflect population changes. The problem is that the people who redraw the lines are the people who run in the districts. And when you draw the lines, it's very, very easy to make your life easier or harder, and to make the life of your party easier or harder. And so people do that, and I've been through the process. The number one goal during redistricting is to make sure that your vote matters as little as possible, okay? And that as few seats are competitive as possible. If there is a seat that's competitive, that is a problem to be fixed, all right? And so there's a lot of bad things that come of that, unaccountable politicians and races that never get any attention because they're not competitive, and so there's not even a debate. But the biggest problem, I think, and what leads to things not getting done, is the fact that our incentive as politicians, look, if Bryan and I are both in 50-50 districts, right? We need votes from the independents to get reelected. We need votes from across the aisle, because we're not going to get all our votes, or not all our voters may turn out in a given year. So what's my political incentive? It's to look reasonable and moderate, and to look like I can get things done. Talk about the bill I co-sponsored with Bryan and how we work together. That's our incentive. But now, draw the lines a little differently, and we both have 70-30 districts, his 70-30 Republican, mine 70-30 Democrat. I'm never going to lose to a Republican. He's never going to lose to a Democrat. We have no incentive to reach across the aisle or get things done or look like we're moderate. Our incentive is to avoid losing the only election we can lose, which is a primary to a more ideologically pure challenger than us. And so rather than talking about how I work with Bryan, I'm going to talk about what an idiot he is and how he hates America. And I would never even talk to a guy like that, okay? And that's what's happened in Washington. That's what's happened in our state. People are in deep, deep red or deep, deep blue districts, which just drives people far apart. And that's a huge problem. Until we resolve that, it's going to be very difficult to get things done. And just very quickly, the other issue is campaign finance. In Pennsylvania, if you wanted to give money to a presidential candidate this year, let's say you were a big Lincoln Chafee fan, because I know a lot of people out there were. Let's say you want to give, the most you could give is $2,700 for the general, $2,700 for the primary. But if you want to give money to Bryan or I or my colleagues down there, you can give us $1 million. There is no limits at all. And if anyone's tempted to do that, I will talk to you after this meeting. When an entity or a special interest can give someone hundreds of thousands of dollars or tens of thousands of dollars, depending on the race, whose phone call you think is going to be answered? I've been in the room. I've been in caucus rooms where where legislative leaders have said, we can't bring up that bill. It'll piss off this group, which gives us a lot of money. Until we address that, we're not going to be solving the problems either. Those are the two big things. Getting rid of our free haircuts isn't going to make anyone's life better. You fix gerrymandering and campaign finance, then you will see a real difference in Pennsylvania.
Thank you. Representative Cutler.
Well, not surprisingly, I do have a slightly different opinion than Daylin, but
he hates America.
Not so much. No, and actually, I do want to highlight something because I've worked with Senator Teplitz and some of the others on the panel. I tend to take a slightly different approach, and by way of background, I'd like to kind of lend my story of how I got in politics because it's kind of the opposite of everything he just said. I will say this, that one of the most frustrating parts of the current election process is the voter apathy and the things that happen. Now, some of that may be because or be perceived to be because of some of the issues that Senator brought up. But myself, I actually ran my third year in law school. I ran my campaign while I was studying for finals and then getting ready to graduate. And I ran against an incumbent that had incredibly high name ID. And I literally won the primary on Tuesday, graduated on Saturday. And the reason I share that is because it was a total grassroots effort. But the one thing that I noticed was the sheer amount of time that I spent educating people on actually what happened in Harrisburg. Whether it was a vote or whether it was a procedural vote or what the expenses were that were related to my opponent's record. And the reason I bring all of that up is because oftentimes, it's not a surprise, government websites are not that useful if they accept the web form, which they didn't back then. And I'll use the expense example. Well, when we requested the expenses, I had to personally come to Harrisburg, deliver the request. They said, thank you for your request, it will be noted. And then several weeks later, I got a formal letter back that said, your items are now ready to be reviewed. I'm like, oh, can you send them to me? Well, sure, at a quarter a page or, whatever the price was at that time. And I said, well, how about if I just come up and do them in person and I'll decide what I want to get copies of, because obviously there's a lot of papers. And the reason I share all of that is because it does not lend itself to us as voters holding our elected officials accountable. So when I ran, I promised that I'd put my expenses online. I was one of the first to do so. And because I don't think you should have to do a right to know request to get the location of where your tax dollars are going. You can see how much money I spend on stamps or, whatever you find interesting when you're on the internet. But my point is it shouldn't be that hard. And the same thing for the votes. It's not an incredibly user-friendly system. Because I personally believe if we can get access to that information, then we as voters will be much more likely to hold our elected officials accountable because we'll know what they did. Because oftentimes, whether it's in Harrisburg or Washington, D.C., there's this perception that, like Daylin said, there's a lot of stuff going on. There's thousands of bills that come and go, and some get voted on and some don't. And to kind of cut through all of that and be able to see a real impact of what that is, I think is beneficial. So in that regard, I think it's important because at the end of the day, it's our job to hold our elected representatives accountable. And, we often hear that, oh, my vote doesn't matter. There is nothing that could be further from the truth. We had a supervisor's race in my local township. Three-way race literally came down to 2 votes. It was 41, 42, 43. And, you think about that. I'm sure there were people who thought, oh, well, I'm not going to go vote. It's not a big deal. And my first term that I came into the House, which would have been, the election cycle of 2006 for the 7-8 term, the majority of the House literally swung on a recount that was decided by, what was it, Daylin, 26 votes or something?
Yeah.
I mean, it was a de minimis amount is my point when you're talking about thousands of votes cast. So we need to recognize the power that we have as voters. Our votes matter, and we need to exercise them, but exercise them not blindly, to political ideology or party affiliation, but what does this candidate stand for? What did they do or not do? And, I believe that will bring some purity to the process and help move things along, because I'm as frustrated as Daylin is in terms of how the approach happens sometimes. Very good ideas sometimes never see the light of day, and then vice versa, the bad ones somehow do. And, it's a matter of working through that and understanding that process.
Thank you. Senator Teplitz?
Thank you. First, let me thank Widener for the invitation. I taught in this room, 10 or 15 years ago to the evening class. I taught a 9 p.m. Thursday night class. Was the last thing between the students and the weekend, so I appreciate a crowd in this room that's awake. And my wife teaches here now, and we very much appreciate being involved with the school. The question, as I heard it, was the biggest challenge facing state government today, and I think that the obvious answer right now is the state budget. We've been dealing with that, going on 8 or 9 months now, and the 2015-16 budget process is starting to bleed into the 2016-17 budget process, and there are a lot of reasons for that, but as it relates to the issue of government reform and the topics that we're here to talk about today, and I think the fundamental issue is there isn't enough bipartisanship, folks working together in the Capitol to get things done. Because in my experience, when we've tried that, it has worked successfully. Couple of examples. When we needed to figure out how to better fund schools and divide up the money that schools receive from the state and distribute that in a more fair process, we divided ourselves up into about a 15 or 16 member special commission, worked for a year, Republicans, Democrats, House and Senate, representatives first of the Corbett administration, then the Wolf administration, a small group, bipartisan group. We worked it out and developed a formula that everyone could support and will be enacted into law as part of whatever the final budget process is. We did that for basic education. That's on its way into law. We've already enacted that for special education. I have a bill to do the same thing, a commission-type format to deal with the issue of charter schools. But we've done it on other issues as well. Daylin and Mike Fulmer, two at the opposite ends of their parties, respectively, have been leading the effort on medical marijuana. Bipartisan effort and bipartisan support. I have a package of bills to prevent the kind of financial crisis that nearly put Harrisburg in bankruptcy, and worked on that with one other Democrat and 2 other Republicans. So I don't want anyone to think that things are bleak or unsolvable. When we do work together as individuals, trying to get things done in small groups, we do achieve a lot. And one of the things that I'm most proud of relating to this topic is when I got to the legislature, after I was elected in 2012, I had a very long government reform agenda, and I know many of my colleagues did as well, but there was no collective voice to unify us to actually get anything across the finish line. And so I thought it was important to form a new government reform caucus, House and Senate, Republicans and Democrats, where we could work together to get something done. And Bryan, I think, was being modest, but Bryan was the first co-chair of that group, and because of his seniority and respect in the House Republican caucus, gave us immediate credibility, and we've been able to, work collaboratively, Republicans, Democrats, House and Senate, on government reform issues. Our big issue relates to gifts, and perhaps we'll get to that later. Spoiler alert, we're against them. And Patty Kim and about 50 or 60 others are members of that caucus. And those relationships that we've developed in that room spill over into working together on other issues. So, I think there is reason to be hopeful that we can get things done when we do it in that way.
Thank you, Representative Kim.
Thank you so much, Widener, for having me here today. Might be a little repetitive, but I do agree that partisanship is what's hurting government, and it is not set up for us to work together. I will talk to somebody who's been in the legislature for 30 years and will say that this is the worst that they've seen it, and I can believe it. So you walk into the state capitol and you go onto the House floor, and we're separated. And when we vote, we have two boards, Republican, Democrats, and you'll know that any lone person who goes on the other side will be right there in red or green, emphasizing that you left your party and now you're, doing something against your party. When we go into caucus to talk about legislation, we go into our separate rooms and we discuss, and it's them versus us. They're evil, we're evil. The only saving grace is that I have a very conservative father, Republican father, so I don't think Republicans are evil. I'm related to one of them, and we just have a difference in opinion. So I think that we need to change that environment where we are working together. And one of the best things that happened was we had a fundraiser called the Capitol All-Star Softball Game. And we had bipartisan teams, East versus West, not Democrats versus Republican. And seeing Daylin in shorts was not pretty, but it brought us together.
That's available on the internet, by the way.
It brought us together because we saw each other not in our stuffy suits, but as real people. And we need to encourage that a little bit more. Another thing that I find a problem is that moderates are a dying breed. And I have realized that being a Democrat, I have so much pressure. And of course, we have to run every 2 years, and we have to raise money between $80,000 to $100,000 to have a real campaign. I get pulled from the left because they're the ones who give you money, okay? There are no groups out there saying, we will give you money if you decide or not decide to vote for our issues. Who does that, right? It's usually far left and far right. So now the moderates don't have a lot of money. Mom and dad have said no for the 17th time. They don't want to give you money anymore. So we're all pulled to our own opposite ends. And it's really hurting the moderates. And because, like Rob has said, it takes both parties. I've only been there for 3 years. But the transportation bill was huge that we did during the Corbett administration, bipartisan. Medical marijuana, bipartisan. And we need more of that where we can come more closer to the middle. So I think the system is broken, and I think there are a lot of reforms that we can change that. And I'm sure we'll be discussing today. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll follow up with the first topic will be redistricting reform. And so I know we've got a lot of legislators on this panel today who have been very active with this issue, and I know Senator Teplitz mentioned he's been working with Representative Cutler on this issue. So could you give us a little bit more details on that? So we heard from Senator Leach, I think, gave an excellent description of what the problem is with redistricting. So what are some of the potential solutions? So we'll start with Senator Teplitz.
Sure. And actually, the Government Reform Caucus that Bryan and I started, when we talked about what issues we wanted to tackle from the beginning, Redistricting was one of them that our folks had a consensus around, but it's not one that we have focused on. I am a member of a separate redistricting work group that is also bipartisan and bicameral, and we had a press conference a week or so ago to unveil a proposed bill that takes elements of Daylin's bills and Republican bills, Democratic bills, to establish an independent citizens commission that would look at data and develop the maps that way, rather than have a bunch of party insiders trying to just protect incumbents or protect the majority. We would put it in the hands of real voters, deciding it on a nonpartisan basis, just based on the numbers, which is a system that exists in other states, so that in the end, the voters are choosing their legislators as opposed to the other way around. We have those bills introduced, and we're hoping to make progress on them this session.
Representative Cutler.
Sure, and I'll go into a little bit bigger detail because this last election cycle was actually kind of interesting when you watched what happened from a purely political science standpoint. And I'll share the data, and Daylin and I have discussed this before, and not surprisingly, we have slightly different reads on it. But, it is interesting to kind of watch what the current process was and how that played out demographically in the election results. Because if you look at all of the House districts as they're currently drafted, good, bad, or indifferent, the way that they are drafted, the House Republicans actually won 30 House districts that Governor Wolf carried. And so there was a bifurcation there of the vote totals when you look at them. And I think there's a lot of reasons. I think part of it is the legislature is generally viewed as a body, but we as individuals are generally viewed more favorably than the body, whereas the governor is a single entity and a single person. So I think that plays into it. Part of it's obviously the candidates, if you had good candidates versus bad candidates, and the way that plays out. And then the inverse also occurred, but not quite to the same regularity, because there were 2 House seats that Governor Corbett carried, but the House Democrats won. And the reason I share that is because I think sometimes the voters are a lot smarter than we give them credit for in terms of how they vote or how they choose to vote. And you can go back and, you can parse data both ways. But do I think the process can be improved? Sure. I mean, we've had several amendments. Steve Samuelson's kind of the guy who's always worked on it in the House. Absolutely, Senator. So he's had some ideas there. I think that it will become a topic of discussion. The biggest hurdle that we have just from a purely procedural standpoint, however, is the fact that if we choose to change it, you have to get it in place before 2020, which is only 4 years away, in order to get that in place. So that's something that we are working, through. I don't know how soon, if at all, that will get a vote, but that is there, and that is something that I know a lot of folks are interested in. But at the same time, I do have a lot of confidence in the voters to make the right choice, regardless of who is on it. And I know we're going to get to it a little bit later, because some of this bleeds into the idea of merit selection of judges, which I know is another question, which we'll talk about in a little bit.
And we're so happy that Senator Pat Vance was able to join us. Thank you so, no, thank you so much for coming. So I just want to give her a chance. We just started, every legislator had a chance to just give a little bit of an introduction. I sort of posed the general question of, what do you think is the biggest challenge facing Pennsylvania government? And we've heard about a need for more bipartisanship. We've heard about budget troubles. We've heard about the sort of dying breed of moderates. We've heard about voter apathy. We've heard about campaign finance, redistricting, as I think I mentioned. So I just want to give you a chance if there's anything you want to add to those sort of opening remarks.
The only thing I'd like to add is I'd like to restore the credibility of the legislature. Everyone thinks all of us are bad, and that is absolutely not true. However, we have many members who posture. They say one thing and do another, and so it affects everyone who is trying to do the right thing and to be honest and upfront. There's a lot of ways we can do it. I have been in the legislature for some time, and I have never seen the gulf between the liberals and the conservatives. And it really is, it's on a very small island if you happen to be a moderate.
Thank you and welcome. So Senator Leach, I have a question for you, sort of related to the redistricting question. You mentioned in your description of the problem that, you know, primaries become really the only election that matters. And my understanding is that we didn't always have primaries. And so my question for you, are primaries a good thing? And if not, what are some of the potential alternatives?
Well, primaries, no, I think primaries are a good thing, and I think they're sort of settled at this point. I mean, you have to have a mechanism to pick the nominees of parties, and if you don't have primaries, then literally the only alternative I'm aware of is the smoke-filled room, you know, where party leaders get together and they pick people, and I don't think anyone wants to see that happen. But I just want to just comment on, very briefly, on just so people understand about gerrymandering. One or two more words about this. I don't know if anyone can see this. This is a congressional district in Pennsylvania, okay? Just the red is now, why would it look like that? Okay? It looks like that, and I can explain why, but it's my congressional district where I live. There is an incumbent who, and look, this is not a partisan thing. Democrats do this in states they control. This is a systemic problem, not an individual problem. It just so happens the Republicans control Pennsylvania when this was drawn. There's a Republican incumbent here, and he lives in sort of the squiggly area here, but there's too many Democrats around in Delaware County to give him a safe seat. So they had to draw this little, it's like Goofy kicking Daffy, but they had to draw the little line all the way out to rural Lancaster and Berks County to give him enough Democrats to make it a safe seat. And the goal was to have 0 competitive seats in this. And so, you know, it is true that occasionally some lightning strikes or there's a top of the ticket issue, which is, different. But generally speaking, I mean, I'm head of the Democratic Senate Campaign Committee. There's basically considered to be 3 competitive seats this year. That's out of 25. In the House, most years it's 6, 7, 8 out of 102. Most incumbents, or many incumbents, most years don't even have opponents because it's just not worth it. So it is a huge problem. And again, there's a lot of solutions for it, which we can maybe talk about. But I just want to emphasize, you know, when you look at something like this, it does, I think, give you pause at least as to why we're drawing lines like this for districts.
Actually, I have a question I'd love to hear from both Senator Vance and Representative Kim. So we heard in the introductory statements talk about how, you know, a decline of bipartisanship, and you know, as you know, I'm a professor, but I'm also a voter, and I live in the state, and you know, I think I speak for a lot of people when sometimes I think, like, why can't they just get it done? So if either of you could speak a little bit more about what stops people from working together. I mean, I think as Senator Vance mentioned, I firmly believe, you know, members of the legislature are good people who, you know, do these jobs because they're interested in public service. So where does it go wrong?
I think I would like to do it, blame it on an unusual source, and that's social media. Believe it or not, everybody's so quick to go up on the web and voice their opinion, far right, far left, and then once they're already out there voicing their opinions, it makes it much more difficult to sit down and talk about it quietly. That is one of the biggest differences I've seen. And another difference I see, that people are attacked personally. If, in fact, you don't agree with somebody, there was always a time you would sit down quietly and try and work it out. But now, if you don't agree with people 100% on any issue, you become the enemy. Now, there are exceptions. There are people who are willing to sit down and work. The one thing, and this is maybe not an answer to your direct question, but the thing I'd like to see most is allowing independents to vote in a primary, because then we would get more competitive general elections. Most of the moderate Republicans in my area have now become independents, and that does not bode well for reaching a solution in the middle.
Thank you. Representative Kim?
Something I learned that was surprising, and maybe it was common sense to other people, but once I ran through election and won by 43 votes, and I'm finally in, thinking I'm going to represent my district as well as I can. You pick leadership. And when the big meetings and the big decisions happen, your leaders go into a room and they talk it out, and then they come out and then they give us marching orders. I'm like, what? Are you serious? And then the top leaders from all chambers and both houses are all males. And I like to think that if there were more women at the table, we'd get this done a little bit quicker, but, we don't know that. We don't have proof for that. But I think that would be very helpful. So the need for more women in elected offices, I think, is very important. Women tend to, men, when they look at success, they see it as climbing a ladder. For women, it's linking arms and working together and pushing forward, not really into getting the credit, So I think having more women would be very helpful, and just opening up the process so that more people are involved instead of just governor leaders on both sides could help the process go better, I think.
Thank you. Representative Cutler?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the bipartisanship. We've kind of danced around the issue so far, Senator Teplitz and myself, but I think it's worth reiterating. And I think Senator Vance actually hit on one of the reasons. And to be very honest, when I came to Harrisburg, that's just how I approach problems. I came from the healthcare industry. That was how we solved everything. When we had an issue, we did a root cause analysis. You figure it out. You figure out what the pieces are. You figure out how something went wrong. And so I immediately started working with, and part of it was, to be clear, part of it was necessity. I was in the minority for the first 4 years, and so I found Democrats that cared about issues that I did, and we had co-prime sponsors, and we worked on bills together, and we've had a bunch of them get out, but the media is not as interested in that when those kinds of things happen. I can wager a bet that everybody here knows that about 17% of the budget needs to be completed yet, but very few people probably know that we also passed 100 other bills, that most of which had bipartisan support, and most of which of them might have even been unanimously, because they fly under the radar. It's only the confrontational pieces that get the coverage. And myself and Representative DeLisio worked on an issue that took 30 years to get through in regards to hospital licensure and all the pieces that were on it. And I know that Senator Vance was very helpful on that issue. And yet there's a whole host of reasons as to why it never happened. And we're working on a similar issue related to biosimilars now. And it's like, this makes sense. Let's find somebody. Let's get it through. And it's just not as exciting sometimes on the 6 o'clock news to say the word impasse as opposed to, they did these 5 bills today. And that definitely makes it much more complicated to get the support on those issues, because that's not what's being fed in on the backside in terms of the media.
Thank you. So let's talk a little bit about gifts and gift bans. So Governor Wolf has instituted a gift ban in the executive branch, but that doesn't apply to the legislature. But he did recently announce that he would like a gift ban for all public officials to be instituted in Pennsylvania, along with some other proposals and some proposals for campaign finance reform. And so I'd like to ask all of you to comment on this general topic in terms of, gifts, lobbying, your interactions with lobbyists and that sort of thing. And maybe there are some misconceptions you can clear up along the way, because Senator Leach, I think, was the first to mention the smoke-filled room. And, maybe you can let us know talk a little bit more about lobbying, talking about gift bans, campaign finance limits on contributions from lobbyists, that general topic. So let's actually start with Senator Teplitz.
Great. So on gifts, this is, as I said, this was an issue that the Government Reform Caucus members, which span, the ideological spectrum, decided this was going to be our issue that we wanted to work on, because we had a lot of ideas of things that need to be reformed. Some of them got more agreement among the group than others. But when we looked at what was both a meaningful reform that could also be passed into law, that narrowed the field, and we got down to gifts. In the first session of our caucus, 2013-2014, we developed a bill to just require greater disclosure. Right now, there are certain dollar thresholds above which you need to disclose a gift or hospitality, entertainment, lodging, transportation. So we would have just required greater disclosure by reducing the dollar threshold that would trigger reporting, and that in and of itself would create an incentive not to take certain things, because if you've got to report it, you might think twice about taking it. And that was the experience in Kentucky, for instance, which moved kind of seamlessly, naturally from a disclosure model to more of a ban. So then when Governor Wolf took office and instituted a gift ban in the 15-16 session, the beginning of that session, we talked as a caucus and said, okay, well, what do we want to do? Do we want to keep pushing our bill, which had gotten out of a House committee but hadn't gone beyond that in the House or the Senate? And our members decided that we wanted to move towards a ban. We wanted something stronger. And the governor deserves a lot of credit for moving the conversation generally in that direction. So we developed bipartisan bills. They've been introduced in the House and the Senate to ban gifts. There is a general prohibition and then some reasonable exceptions to deal with some very practical issues. You know, the constituent that brings brownies to thank your staff for helping them with a problem. The hats and the mugs that are just sort of dropped off by advocacy groups unsolicited. Things like that. You know, even the receptions that we're all at, that different groups put on to sort of pull us all into one room and talk about their issues. Something, again, that we thought was both meaningful and passable, and so we are promoting that. I was with the governor today downtown when he unveiled his entire government reform package. It dealt with gifts, outside income, pay-to-play, campaign finance, lobbying, and I was very pleased to see that the gift issue is one of those issues, and as a caucus, we're hoping that the administration uses our bills as a template for what they're doing.
And can I just follow up real quickly? What is pay to play, just in case some of our viewers don't know what that means?
Yeah, pay to play is, in its sort of crudest description, giving someone a campaign contribution in order to get a state contract.
Thank you. Senator Leach?
Yeah, no, I look, there are gift bans and there are gift bans. I think it's important to be rational about this. I remember when I was first elected to the House, I showed up the first day and there was all these things on my desk, mostly mugs and shirts. There was the speaker got us all a pocket watch. The Pfizer pharmaceutical company left me a giant pencil that said Viagra on it, and I didn't know what I was supposed to do with that exactly. But look, you saw some stories recently about some legislators who took envelopes of cash. We're against that. That is illegal already. 4 of them, I believe, have been convicted of crimes and are gone from the legislature. I think they're all gone from the legislature at this point. One's still there. So that is illegal. That should be illegal. Gifts of cash. That's not really a gift. That's more of a bribe. On the other hand, I went to a CLE and Secretary Hanger, when he was still secretary, was there. And he was subject to the governor's total ban, and there was a bottle of water. He couldn't drink the bottle of water that was in front of him like we have here now. Now maybe you view us as corrupt because we drank this, but I mean, I'm like, just have the damn water, John. I mean, it seemed really silly to me. No one is selling their soul or a vote for cheese cubes at a reception. All right, and so like something like that's just going to make it difficult. If I go out with some of the lobbyists are friends of mine, okay? And if we go out for a drink and he's like, I'll get the next round, I don't want to have to go to prison for that, all right? So no one's selling and it all has to be, you have to keep in mind the context. I'm allowed to take a $100,000 campaign contribution from this person. So to say he can't buy me a Diet Coke is probably silly. What we should do is change the $100,000 he could give me. That's what we're really going to do, and not. And I'm not suggesting anyone here is doing that, but I think the total ban kind of idea just trivializes things, makes everyone's life more difficult, doesn't actually solve a problem when there's a huge gaping hole in the law that is a huge problem we should be solving. And so I support, what I support is, I think disclosure is great. There's a threshold amount, is it $600 per year still? Threshold amount that you have to, if someone's buying you tickets to the Super Bowl, no one ever did that for me, but I'm told that it happened, that's something that obviously is a different situation. But like, shrimp cocktail, I don't think we should get ourselves all exercised about that.
Representative Kim?
Yeah, so I believe gift bans are important, but it's not going to really help. It's going to help with perception, and it's going to help with the integrity of the body. But if a legislator wants to get free stuff, they'll find a way to do it. And I think that what I have learned to be comfortable with is learning to live with in a state of paranoia, that I might get caught. I may be following all the rules, but I have to worry about the perception, the optics of me doing something, just because I don't want to get in trouble. I want to do my job, but I don't want to be perceived that I'm doing something legal, and as you know, you ruin your credibility, and you're not, some people still get reelected, but your credibility is everything. I think with the gift bans, there's always loopholes, so it's going to be a process of whack-a-mole kind of game. You gotta, if you do this, then we're going to do this, and we're going to do this. I agree with Senator Leach in terms of campaign finance reform, but the gift ban, we need to do it once, make it practical, and then hopefully it will give more of the public more security that we're trying to do the right thing.
And Senator Vance?
Thank you. Reform efforts have waxed and waned during my tenure. It was probably at its height right after the pay raise. Everybody wanted to be absolutely pure. And I have found out, and should be, by the way, I feel the need to say I didn't vote for the pay raise and I didn't take it. So I'm also paranoid. There you go. But I do believe that what's acceptable in one area of the state is people from central Pennsylvania would never dream of taking envelopes stuffed with dollar bills. The culture here, and hopefully our own integrity, would never allow that. But in areas like Philadelphia, they don't think too much about that. And so there is a difference in the culture, right or wrong. But we have made some small things. The one reform effort that I really like that passed the Senate last session has not yet come out of state government this session. It's sort of an old trick. If right before a campaign, if you don't want somebody, your opponent, to see all the donations you received, you do hard copy, because it takes the Department of State forever to post it as a hard copy. So the legislation said, do it online. It's instantly available. That would do so much to clean up pre-election campaign expenses, and it's such an easy thing to do. It's simple. I don't want to say it's simplistic, but it's one that would work quickly and would help take a huge step in the process. And yet, it didn't pass in the House last time, and this time it hasn't even gotten out of committee in the Senate, and that's not something to be proud of. That's something to be ashamed about.
Representative Cutler?
Yeah, thank you. Actually, I had something similar amended into one of my bills that was in the Senate, and I was too disappointed that it didn't pass in terms of electronic filing and some of the requirements there, because it's so easy. I mean, we do everything, on our phones and on the internet now, and I think in a lot of ways things need to be updated in how government interacts with the public. I mean, it goes back to my first set of comments in regards to holding all of us accountable and having access to the information to make an informed decision. In terms of the gift ban, I agree with everyone up here that it needs to be practical and easily applied. Otherwise, I do think that it potentially would be ignored. And the example I always use, and all the proposals that I've heard thus far, with the exception of the governor's complete ban, is anything that's perishable, or you don't want to criminalize the little old woman who brings you in an apple pie because you helped her worth a road issue or the license issue. And quite frankly, and this goes back to culture as well, they'll be offended if we don't take it. So you have to take that into consideration anytime that you're drafting something like this. I oftentimes will use the term the lowest common denominator. I know it's a mathematical term, but I think it applies to legislation as well. Whatever the smallest piece that you can get everybody to agree on, you go right up to the point where somebody drops off on the agreement wagon and they say, okay, that's where we're going to stop. So let's distill it down to that. Let's get it moving. But I've personally been I know that the efforts have waxed and waned, but I think that the increase of information available in terms of being publicly available goes a long way to helping all of these efforts, whether it's the gifts, whether it's campaign finance or reapportionment. All of that helps to keep us in check, which is our job as voters, is to make sure that we're informed and we make the right decisions, and then you hold us accountable if we don't.
Thank you. Senator Vance, I have a question for you, and that's about lobbyists. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about, how, if at all, you've seen the role of lobbyists change in your tenure in the Senate, or even just give us a little, sort of education, information about, what is it exactly that lobbyists do? I think sometimes lobbyists get a bad rap. They do serve an important informational purpose. So if you could just talk a little bit about lobbyists.
Hopefully on any issue, you have lobbyists on both sides of the issue that are coming to talk to you. It's really educational. They make you see both sides, and then it's our responsibility to make a decision. Most of the lobbyists are upright and really want to talk about their product. I'm sure you know that we have contract lobbyists who just are hired on to do a specific issue. And then we have lobbyists who just lobby for instance, the Hospital Association. They always lobby just on that one issue. I think it's probably, in my own opinion, easier to be a lobbyist for just one issue than to be an expert on a number of, to be a contract lobbyist and be hired for them. Overall, I think most lobbyists are upfront. I only have had two that I won't deal with anymore. The only thing they have to give us is information, and if they deliberately give us false information, then I won't deal with them. There's two that I absolutely won't deal with because they told me things that they had to know in their heart were not right, so I don't want to deal with them. But overall, most of them are hardworking and trying to make you see their side of the story, and that's good in most cases. And the more they know, the more credibility they have, the better lobbyists they are.
Anyone else want to add anything? Senator Teplitz?
I share the Senator Vance's view, and I think I do because I'm a lawyer, and a lot of us here are lawyers or law students, and so I can relate to that. I mean, they are hired to use their professional expertise to advocate for a position for a client. That doesn't make them a bad person, and it doesn't make them a bad person even if the client has an unpopular position on something. I mean, as lawyers, that's what we do. And I think Pat's right. You have to put it in perspective. They're there to give you information. You can then do with that information what you want. I mean, if you're a legislator and you are just taking that information in and will then be a rubber stamp for the last lobbyist you heard on an issue, then you don't deserve to be there. But if you take it as information that is part of the due diligence you should be doing that is much broader than that anyway, then they serve a useful purpose. And just one final thought, and believe me, I'm not here to defend lobbyists, but there's this image that the lobbyist is the big tobacco and big oil. Well, the Humane Society has lobbyists, and that I've worked with on legislation. Other groups that I think we would all unanimously agree are sympathetic groups, they have lobbyists too, and it's so that they have a professional helping to advocate for their cause. So I don't think it's the existence of lobbyists that is a problem. The rules, I think governing lobbyists need to be reformed, the way they interact, the way they report, all of that needs to be improved, but their existence itself is not the problem in my view.
Thank you. Representative Kim?
So yes, they're here to educate, they're here to, explain their clients' views. But what gets kind of messy in the gray areas is that if they're the ones who are always showing up at your fundraiser, do you feel more obligated to be more open to their clients' views? When you build relationships with them, they love to talk about your kids and how your kids are doing. So then now you're actually kind of friends with your lobbyists, and then you don't really want to, even you may not agree with them or this is not a really big issue, you might just kind of go along with them. So that's where I think it gets the gray areas. PLS is a website where there's all kinds of, there's minutes and notes on every committee hearing there are, and there's also information on us. And where it goes as far as, that we have, like, if my favorite food was like Thai, we'll have it on the list, or I like diamond earrings, And lobbyists will use that information to build relations with you. Hey, why don't we go to Thai food, this weekend we can talk about issues. So there's the good lobbyists, and then there's who are kind of a little bit more slimier and try to weasel your way to be more influential in your decisions. So I see both sides.
Mm-hmm. Any other? Representative Cutler?
I'll just add one thing to Senator Vance's comments in regards to lobbyists. I have found the really good lobbyists will actually tell you what the opposition's going to say. Mm-hmm. And I, as a member, appreciate that. I think that is stellar, because they'll make their case and say, but you need to know, here's the other side's viewpoint, and, feel free to talk to them about it. And I just personally appreciate that.
No, I actually agree, and I like lobbyists. Many of them are friends, and they're again, if there's 3,600 bills or whatever being introduced a year, and whatever amount are moving or potentially moving, I can't be an expert on everything. I don't have, for example, any farms in my district. I have a tomato garden. I think I am the largest farmer in my district, and so as a result, if someone comes in with a farming bill, and I'm like, I need to be educated on that. And Brian's right. A good lobbyist will say, now this is my position. This is what the opposition is saying, and here's why they're wrong. That's fine. And if they don't say that, I'll say, well, what's if I support your position? First of all, what's the other side saying, and who's going to be mad at me? And if a lobbyist lies to you, that's the worst, because you'll never believe them again, and you'll tell everyone that not to believe this person. And so lobbyists serve an important role. I know the term has become sort of pejorative, but people legitimately go around try to educate. Again, children in foster homes have lobbyists. There's lots of really good people who are lobbyists for really good causes. Mm-hmm. It's not all like a bunch of guys like Snidely Whiplash with their mustaches and bags of cash under it doesn't work like that. And so I have no problem saying that I think lobbyists, for the most part, are useful parts of the process.
So I have two more questions for the panel, and then we'll open it up to audience questions. So my second to last question is, should we have a full-time legislature, right? Not every state has a full-time legislature. My understanding is that there are pros and cons of both. And, a related question is, if we have a full-time legislature, should it be the size that it is? So actually, I'll start with Representative Kim, and then we'll just come on down the line.
I had a great opportunity where I could be a part of this leadership program. I was one of two, myself and Ryan McKenzie, went down to UVA to the Darden School of Business, and we had other state legislators from across the country. And I realized how different Pennsylvania does things. The majority of them are part-timers. Majority of them are paid per diem, maybe less than $20,000 a year as a part-timer. And I talked and heard their stories and how difficult it is to have a full-time job that you get paid, and then you do your part-time legislative work, which is probably the same amount of constituent work that I have on a daily basis, but doing that part-time. My district has about 26% poverty rate. I have a very, I love my district, but it can be very needy at times, and I'm constantly doing constituent work for them, and I cannot imagine doing that part-time, just trying to get them the resources that they need to continue. I do see compromise in terms of reducing the size of the legislature. The con to that is that I will be less accessible, which may not be a good thing, because what's going to happen is I'm going to have a larger district, and I like to save money. I like to save taxpayer money in terms of having less legislators, but in return I may be adding more staff members because I have to reach a bigger district, and in the end I'm not sure if it's really going to save money. But I do like to work with less than 203 of us. I think it gets a little bit chaotic in terms of trying to get things passed. I'm so jealous of the Senate, with only 50 senators. I would love to see something more down to 150, so that just for terms of decision-making and voting-wise.
Thank you, Senator Teplitz.
I think Patty made the points that I would have made. I'll just add, I have a district that is incredibly diverse, from the city of Harrisburg out to the suburbs of Dauphin County, up north to northern Dauphin County, very rural, and then all of Perry County, even more rural. If I were, part-time, I don't know how I would be able to get around as much as I am now, and even now with 3 district offices and staff and doing as much as we can do, a good legislator never feels like they're doing enough. So I think it would not work to the benefit of the people that we're supposedly trying to help by cutting down to part-time. Maybe you'd save a little bit of money, but they wouldn't get the service that they're entitled to. On the size of the legislature issue, I've been a co-sponsor and I voted for bills to cut the size of the legislature. You need to do it in a smart way. There are, I think there's an ideal number of seats that you can get to, but if you cut too much, that's too much. Districts become too big, and again, it becomes a service issue. It becomes an issue where you're paying for more staff, you're paying for more travel, you're paying for more offices. So you need to do that with balance. I think that these issues would not come up repeatedly from the public if they felt like the legislature as it exists now was serving them. If we serve them well and address the bigger issues of dysfunction in the Capitol, I don't think there would be these calls as the solution, which is an imperfect solution.
Thank you, Senator Vance.
I would agree with Senator Teplitz. If in fact we were doing our job that we should, we could justify a full-time legislature. We are not doing the job we should right now. There's no question about that. As far as size, because I happen to reside in Cumberland County, which is the fastest growing county in the state, we're supposed to have 240 to 250,000 people. I represent about 270, and it just keeps growing and growing. And I'm not complaining about that, but I think I have been in both the House and Senate. I do believe that they could reduce the size of the House somewhat, but I'm not sure that the votes would be there to reduce just the House. So it appears that probably if they reduce the size of the House, it would have to be the Senate as well. I can tell you honestly, I work 7 days a week and I can never keep up with the demand. And so I believe our constituents are kind of spoiled too. They're used to a full-time legislature. They expect, I can't tell you how many times I get a call in the morning and we're in session all day, and by 5 o'clock that night, I have somebody yelling on the phone, "You didn't call me back." Well, it's not that I wasn't going to, it's just that time is a constraint sometimes. So they do expect service, and they should have service, don't misunderstand me. But with that, there should be a little bit of understanding of what's going on during the day as well.
Thank you, Representative Cutler.
Yeah, I think the biggest part of this debate, and it's going to sound ironic probably, but a lot of folks assume that if we cut the size of the legislature, most of the budgetary problems would go away. And that simply is not true. We're not going to, you could wipe out the entire legislative branch. It's 1.5% roughly of the overall budget. The judiciary's roughly a slightly less amount. So reforming both of them might have very good reasons, but you're not going to solve our financial problems solely on those two cuts. Now, with that said, I too have voted to downsize this. I've previously for the last 3 sessions been the prime sponsor in the House of the part-time legislative body. And I'll briefly share the reasons as to why. Most of the constituent work, and we get about 60,000 contacts through the district office throughout a year. And I think that's, to Senator Vance's point, there's an expectation that comes with that. I've had people yell at me when they email me at 8 o'clock in the morning if I haven't responded by 5 o'clock. On a normal day, I get about 300 emails. And as we work through those, I think it's important to kind of highlight what the expectations are as opposed to what the impact will be if we go to part-time or downsize, both of which are fine, because at the end of the day, they're both constitutional amendments, and the voters have the right to make the decision by which form of government we choose to work with. However, I think we have to have a very real conversation about what the real impact will be, because I agree with, I think it was Patty who said, when Rob, there's an expectation that you're going to maintain all the offices, because I only want to drive to Quarryville. I don't want to drive to Lampeter to see my representative and get my paperwork. And for those unfamiliar with Lancaster County, that's about a 20-minute drive. But for a lot of folks, there's the expectation that they'll get rid of half of us, but we'll still keep all the offices and all the access. And I'm not saying that that's not a reason not to have the discussion, but we have to be honest with what the real impact will be. Most of the work that we end up getting through the district office generally deals with an administrative office who needs some kind of follow-up or assistance. The legislative services have really grown out of necessity because of unresponsiveness on the part of some of the administrations and departments. Somebody will call and say, well, I called PennDOT and I have a problem with my license. So we call somebody who's different in the phone chain. Or I've got a problem with DEP and I can't get a permit. Can you help me? And I kind of back it up the chain a little bit and say if they would be a little bit more responsive to constituents, the way they're responsive to all of us when we call, I think a lot of these issues would go away. Constituents deserve to have an answer, as Senator Vance said. They deserve to have that service. I just don't know why they can't get it sooner when they call the agency or the department the first time.
Senator Leach?
Yeah, I sort of always take the unpopular positions with regards to this sort of thing, because, if I don't get enough hate mail, I get bored. It's part of having ADD. But let me say this. I am a strong opponent of both a part-time legislator and shrinking the legislature. On the part-time issue, I agree with everything that's been said about the demands of constituent service and all of that. There are many things that we do in our districts who it's no one else's job to do and wouldn't get done if we didn't do them. And so I think that's hugely important. But I will also say there's a second reason, which is that I'm talking about issues. We vote on issues that are extremely important and complicated. What is our healthcare system? What is our transportation needs? What's our education system about? I can go on and on. And I want someone as a legislator who's going to go to hearings on these issues, then meet with stakeholders, and then meet with constituents, and then maybe come to an opinion and write an editorial, and then go to more meetings about it, and then be involved in the negotiations. And I don't want someone voting. These are life and death issues. I don't want someone voting on a healthcare system on their way to take a deposition, or coming home from selling suits at Macy's. I want them to focus on this. Okay, and it's worth $5 a year per person that we pay to have that. I think that's worth it, to have someone whose job it is to actually spend all of their time learning about all of the issues that they're confronted. I don't see how you do that if you're part-time and you have to have another full-time job in order to support your family. In terms of shrinking the legislature, there are many reasons I think it's a bad idea. But there's a key fact you have to know. One of the things we're told is we have one of the largest legislatures in the country. That is false. We have one of the smallest legislators in the country, because there's only really one fair way to judge the size of a legislature, which is how many people do you represent? You can't say, well, we have more legislators in Idaho, because there are no people in Idaho. Literally zero. No one lives in Idaho. Okay? And so in terms of that, the average state senator nationwide represents about 63,000 people. We represent 260,000 people. The average House member represents about 48. We represent about 62,000 people. There are only 6 Senates that in the country that represent more people per senator than we do. Okay, so we already have among the largest districts in the country. And if you make them larger, aside from the lack of access and all the other things that have been talked about, coming full circle back to one of my big issues I talked about earlier, the bigger the district, the easier it is to gerrymander and to make whole voting groups irrelevant to the political process. So I think to save a few bucks, we're going to put more power in fewer hands. We're going to take away access. We're going to make districts easier to gerrymander. We're going to make it very tough for rural legislators whose districts are already 3 hours from end to end. You know, to save a few bucks, we're better than that, I think. And so that's why I have opposed those.
Thank you. And Senator Vance, you wanted to add something?
Well, Daylin, you just touched on what I was going to say. Some of the senators have 7 counties, and they're rural, and there's not a lot of people in those counties, but just the time involved to travel from one end to their districts are enormous. So if we reduce the number of senators, people will not get any attention, but it is very difficult to represent a rural area in the Senate because of all the different counties involved.
Thank you. Okay, here's my last question. And, you know, this program is taking place in a law school, so I have to ask this question. And Representative Cutler, I'll start with you because I know you've thought a lot about this question. Merit selection of judges. Good idea? Bad idea? How would that work if we had merit selection of judges? What is merit selection of judges?
I'm going to fully disclose my bias. I do have and have been working on that bill in the House for the last 3 terms as the prime sponsor with Madeline Dean, who's from Montgomery County. And I personally, I'll kind of highlight what the current system is and why I think that the current system fails us and why I support the bill, because it is actually a position that most would assume that I would not support by virtue of the district makeup that I represent. First of all, I think by and large, we all know our local MDJs, our local county judges, and are very engaged in that political process. Just like most of our residents probably could recognize us if they ran into us at the grocery store, and I know that many of us have that issue. You know, there is no such thing as a simple trip to buy milk and bread. My wife will not send me anymore because it's a 45-minute plus trip for me to get in and out of the store, and I'm fine with that. But that local connection is important to why I think that and have concerns with the statewide proposal. When you get into the statewide election of judges, all too often I think that we as voters rely on the existing party structure to select and move those candidates forward. So instead of having, you know, character quality and judicial temperance and those kinds of things at the forefront of the local decision making on the statewide level, you get into who can raise the most money, who has the best name ID, who's from a what I would call a geographical anchor, i.e. they would have a base of votes to come from. And sometimes you could win based simply on ballot position. You know, are you first, are you last, instead of being buried in the middle. And to borrow Senator Leach's line, these are life and death decisions that are being made. And I think that our process should be better than that when it comes to statewide judges. And that's why we worked on the bipartisan proposal. It would be a hybrid system. We would only do this for statewide elections because of the existing process. And it takes, I think, elements from many other states that are, in fact, the best of each one. We tried to make model legislation in terms of the selection process and how it goes. We would have a commission, 13 members, 8 picked by the legislature, 5 by the governor, and you know there's all kinds of constraints. You know, no more than 3 from the same party, nobody from the same county. That way, you would hopefully have diversity amongst the nomination commission. They would forward a list of names to the governor for selection and then Senate confirmation. And what's interesting, and I alluded to this at the beginning, the opposition to this has been fascinating to me because I think it's fair to say, and while Daylin and I joked about it, I think it's fair to say we're on different ends of the political spectrum on a lot of things in terms of our districts, in terms of our voting records. But, and Representative Dean and I have had this conversation as well, we are very different in terms of the areas we represent. But I do believe that in this particular case that there is a better method and a better process than what we do currently, just because of the importance of these positions. And we alluded to it earlier in terms of us as legislators. If people don't believe in the process, if they don't believe in the process, they're never going to believe in the product. And in this case, I think that is of paramount importance, because you have to understand that a judge is making a decision based on a law and their interpretation of it and the Constitution and how it's applied, not based on who was listed on their campaign filing reports and things like that. Now, where the politics comes in, and this is fascinating to me, traditionally, we have not had action on this bill. We moved it out of committee with a bipartisan vote earlier this session. And I want to thank Chairman Marsko for moving it, and Representative Dean for her help in securing the Democratic votes. Because traditionally, those groups who oppose it are the trial attorneys, labor organizations, and pro-life groups, which is kind of an odd trifecta in terms of allies who have opposed this. And I've had a lot of folks in the district that I represent call me and say, well, why would you ever support this and take my right to vote for a judge away? I said, we're not taking your right away, because when you look at it, there will be a retention election at year 4. You're going to have an actual judicial record to vote on then, not campaign statements, not ideas where you think you are because of the judicial canon of ethics, and not being able to explain positions. Because what happens at that point, unfortunately, is people by and large go in and they simply pull a lever based on party affiliation or if they recognize a name. And that was evidenced by every person who called me. I said, who was on the ballot last time? We had 3 seats up. Most people could not name any candidate, let alone one. And there were 3 seats. And having the distinction of being the most expensive judicial election in the history of the country is not something that I think that we should wear. And for that reason, I've supported the bill. It's went through many iterations, and part of it is in an attempt to find that compromise, to find those areas of agreement where we can get something advanced on this issue. And Speaker Turzai just recently came out. He supported the bill. He thinks it's a good compromise. And most surprisingly, all of the living governors, from Governor Wolf on back, everybody, they did a press conference, I think it was about a week and a half ago, and they also endorsed the concept because they understand that this process needs to have a good hard look at it. And again, it's a constitutional amendment. If you really think you're good at winning elections, then you can beat the constitutional amendment. But I think we as voters have a right to say who and more importantly, how we pick our judges.
Does anybody else want to comment on this topic? Senator Leach?
I'm going to say something I don't say every day, which is I agree 100% with Bryan Cutler. There are a couple of reasons. I mean, first of all, I think you get, on average, and this is not disparaging any individual because there's exceptions, but on average, you just get higher quality judges when there's a governor who has a legacy that they're worried about in terms of appointing, and that there is a process of merit selection that gives the governor some choices. I mean, when there's, we've had a lot of problems with our judiciary in Pennsylvania over the last bunch of years. I remember when I was first getting involved in politics, there was one Supreme Court justice tried to run over another one in a parking lot with a car. You remember that?
Yes, I do.
I'm not making that up. And when people say, well, how did this person become a judge? I'm like, you don't have to be Oliver Wendell Holmes. You just have to get the most votes. All right? And people are voting. And when they say, well, it's my sacred right to vote for a judge, I mean, come on. Again, Bryan's right. I'm a lawyer. I'm a legislator. I couldn't name all the candidates on the Commonwealth Court. And I don't know anything about them, certainly. And the average person who goes to show up at the polls, they don't know the first thing about this. So it's just really just either geographic, partisan, or, well, this guy sounds Irish, or whatever it is, okay? This is not how we should pick judges. So you get, I think, a higher quality judge if you have merit selection. And the second issue, and I'm going to tell you I remember the day I became for merit selection. I was living in Allentown, and there was a judicial race up there, and I won't say the person's real name, but one of the judge candidates had a commercial. And their commercial was scary music, and it said, rapists, murderers, child molesters. John Smith is coming for you, vote John Smith, judge, okay? And I'm like, the role of a judge is not to be coming for people. That's not their role. Their role of a judge is to be fair and impartial. And if there is an accused child molester in front of them, but the law says that they have to suppress evidence and to dismiss the charges, I want the judge to do that. Okay? Judges have to make unpopular decisions. That's one of your role as a judge. That's why it's not the political branch. We have two political branches. We're supposed to have one non-political branch. And I don't want a judge who's worried that or someone who won't make an unpopular decision because they promised not to. Okay? For both of those reasons, I support merit selection, even though many of the interest groups that I'm friendly with do not, and they get mad at me about this. But I just think that, look, I named my firstborn after my favorite Supreme Court justice. I take this stuff very seriously. Baby Scalia is beautiful. No, I'm kidding. Her name is Brennan. But I want to name my son Marshall when he came along, but my wife felt we had done the Supreme Court as much as we needed to do it. Point is that this is really important, and we should have the best judges because they have such an important role.
Thank you. Anyone else want to comment on this? Senator Vance and then Senator Teplitz.
I do support statewide merit selection, but I feel strongly that the Common Pleas Court at the county level should be by voters doing that. Any voter that really cares about the system can make an informed decision about their county judges. I'm only hopeful that when we have if we have statewide merit selection, that the committee that's selecting these takes a look at geographic differences. Otherwise, we will have judges from both ends of the state. And this is being a little parochial, but nevertheless, I would like Central Pennsylvania to be represented in the judges that we have as well.
Thank you, Senator Teplitz.
Just briefly, I don't disagree with anything that was said, and I don't oppose merit selection, but I just think we have to recognize that there's going to be politics involved no matter what system we're in. I mean, as long as you have politicians making the appointment or picking the people who will be making the appointment, you're going to have a political process. It may be better in a merit selection model, and I know that a lot of work was done, in the legislation to take that out as much as you can, but I don't think anyone should believe that we will 100% get rid of politics by going to that kind of system. You just have a different kind of politics, maybe better, but you still have some element of politics.
Representative Kim.
I support statewide judges for merit selection. I just wanted to add one more thing. I think that women and minorities fare better under the merit selection, so I think it'd give certain populations a better chance in serving. We need to have a diverse board, obviously.
Thank you. So we have some time for audience questions. If you have a question for any of our legislators, okay, go ahead. Well, sorry. Oh, we've got a mic for you. If you could just wait till you get the mic, and then this way viewers on PCN will be able to hear the question.
Thank you. Since the overarching theme is the state of Pennsylvania government, I really appreciate the moderator's one question that says, should we have a full-time legislature? That evolves into effective legislators. And I'll give you an example, and I'd like you to kind of parse it through. The number was already mentioned, how many bills are introduced per year, and then how many bills are actually passed. I've been recently involved in 3 bills. I watched the process. My focus is transportation. And I've watched these bills be introduced, have hearings, and then lapse after the legislative session. They have to be reintroduced. One bill took three sessions. In the meantime, specific to transportation, what I see, because I follow the hearings, what I see are these bills for naming bridges, naming roads. Hearings are held, and this is not to take away from the dedication of the soldiers and first responders that typically these bills are designated for, but it's a good example of effective legislation. How can you justify, or how would you change or suggest a change in the system to be more effective. If you're going to be full-time, I think the public is really expecting you to be effective. And my example would point the other way. Thank you.
Sure. Senator Teplitz.
Yeah, I wanted to address this because I've been criticized for naming bridges and roads. That criticism assumes, and I don't think it's necessarily implied in your question, but it assumes that it's either or, that you either do that and that the time that you're spending to name a bridge or a road after a fallen veteran or a community leader of some type, that time is displacing time where you should be curing cancer. I mean, it's not the case. I mean, I've introduced hundreds of bills, large bills, small bills, and what gets through the process is what gets through the process. Especially when you're a freshman member of the minority, you have even less control. So, if the only bills with my name on them are bridge and road namings, that's not my cause. It's because those are the bills that the committee chairs have chosen. The other point is, in terms of effectiveness and the process and having to start over, it's a very frustrating process. It's a long process. When you're on the side that you're on of advocating a bill, and we've all been in this position, you're frustrated by how long it takes. But the same process that keeps what I would think is a good thing from happening also keeps what I think is a bad thing from happening. And that's the way the system's supposed to work. And, ideally, those bills that get through all the hurdles, and there are many, represent, some consensus and are the ones that, should be law. So, the process is set up that way. It is frustrating, but it's a process that gives people relief when it stops the things that we don't want to see happen.
Senator Leach.
Yeah, a couple things. I mean, first, I'm unaware that I've been in the legislature for 14 years. Maybe it's happened, but I'm unaware that we've ever had a hearing on a bridge naming.
I was going to say the same
Yeah,
thing.
we don't do that. But, I mean, usually they rush through in seconds.
Right.
They're not taking up time that can be used for other things. There are other impediments to getting things done, but those aren't among them. But I'm going to just throw out an idea, which I believe that a couple other states have done this, that there should be something called an automatic calendar. And what that means, there's a variety of different permutations of that, but my idea would be every single member of the House and Senate would get one bill per session that they would be entitled by rule to have a vote on in committee. Now, that doesn't mean it would pass, but it might, and it would certainly put other members on the spot having to support or oppose it, and it would say a lot about a legislator, like what their number one priority is in terms of, if you get one that doesn't mean you only get one. You work the normal process we have now to get others. But everyone would have one bill that they could be entitled to an up and down vote in a committee that bill is referred to. And other states have done this, and I think it's really interesting. It definitely shakes things up, moves more legislation forward, and puts people on record. Whereas now, it's so easy to say, like, let's say I'm in the Senate and Pat Vance introduces a controversial bill, and let's say I'm in the majority, which I was for a while in the House, and I go to my leadership, man, Pat's bill is very controversial in my area. Can you just kill it? Just don't run it, okay? And it just lies in quiet repose until the end of session. Well, now if I'm entitled to that bill, or if Pat's entitled to that bill, I'm going to have to go on record. I can't go to my constituents and have it both ways. So I think something like that would be an interesting way to shake things up in the legislature.
I want to take another question. Was there another question?
You mentioned the committee.
Wait for the microphone, please.
You've mentioned the committee process several times. Do you think committee chairs have too much power, where one individual can hold up the entire legislative process by simply not bringing a bill to a vote, or even to a hearing?
Well, committee chairs, some use that more than others, but you can always do a discharge resolution and force the bill out of committee, so it's not absolute power.
Other questions?
Gentlemen.
Oh, sorry.
Just a comment. As a practitioner under the Municipalities Planning Code of 1968, as has been amended, there is such a thing as a deemed approval process. When an application is filed, it must be acted upon by the governing body within 90 days of the date of application. I think that principle can be employed in many, many other areas. And the only reason I say that is because you're going to get that action within 90 days from the municipality in the event that is applied for. Now, I'm not thinking that 90 days is a magic number for every piece of legislation, and I'm not even really trying to put the budget crisis in that category at this point. But I think there are lots of occasions where a deemed approval or a deemed denial or some kind of thing which gives definitive action on an application made by somebody is a good thing and should be employed more often. It's a commentary. I don't know whether anybody wants to comment on it or not.
Sure, Representative Cutler.
I'd be happy to, and it's not just because I agree with you. Because I served on, prior to my election into the House, I served on the Planning Commission for my local township. And that was actually a concept that I brought up with me. I said, well, why don't we do this for DEP permits and a whole host of other things? And I think we could, but what I'm seeing now, we just had a case with an approval process. There's a fast track where if, assuming that you put everything in, that you have a guaranteed time window, that you'll get a definite answer, which I think is really what you're getting to. Part of the problem is now I'm seeing things be kicked out of these guaranteed time windows, and we had a case where a developer admittedly had a technicality that he acknowledged he missed, and then he went to the end of the other line. And I think part of that is, and I'll liken it to our own judicial docket in Lancaster County, there has to be some ownership of that. If I'm the person working with you, that should come back to me as soon as you get it done. And so I do think that there are ways to improve that, because like I said, most of the work we get, at least in our district office, is problems with DEP or transportation, or it's always related to some administrative function related to paperwork. And I think that all of that would be good, because it would increase the responsiveness that Senator Vance was talking about in terms of us being there. So I love the idea.
Well, thank you so much. Please join me in thanking our panel of legislators. Thank you all so much for participating, and thank you all for coming.